What's going on, everybody? Today, I'm going to try and break down a topic that I have stewed on for a really long time and that I don't really know the answer to. I don't know if you can have an answer to this question. I'm talking about college football program ceilings. Specifically, today, we're going to go through the ACC, the Atlantic Coast Conference, every team, and try and figure out what the ceiling is for every team in the ACC.
And start celebrating. An undefeated season, an ACC championship. Finished for 13, they did. Number 13, Jordan Travis.
It's really difficult to kind of quantify that because how do you decide what is a ceiling for a program? Like if everything were to go right in any given season, what could the best possible scenario for any given team be? Obviously, you can have one-off seasons where you win 10, 11, 12 games and then immediately drop back into a funk. I think of Syracuse as an example. They won 10 games a few years ago and they have done absolutely positively nothing since then. And for a long stretch before that, they hadn't done anything either. So like, how do you wait that one-off season where they won 10 games, looked really, really good, and then immediately went back to winning 5, 6, 7 games after that, and then for many years before that? It's difficult because obviously I think if you were to look at Syracuse prior to that 10-win season and say, what is the program ceiling for Syracuse? You'd probably say 8 or 9 wins in any given season. If you can consistently win 8 wins or win 8 games a year, if you're at Syracuse, that's the ideal season. That is the ceiling for Syracuse. Evidently, though, that's not the case because they won 10 games one year. So they broke through the glass ceiling, whatever that was for Syracuse. I remember I was watching Colin Cowherd a few years ago. I think it has been a few years now since he said this. And he just brought up the idea of a program's ceiling in college football. You know, when you talk about the NFL, it's set up in such a way in the NFL where there's a competitive balance. Obviously, the worst team in the league gets the number 1 pick every year, and there's a salary cap. So like everybody's working under the same parameters, and it creates parity. Whereas obviously in college football, it's a little bit more capitalist. It's turned into now with NIL a pay-to-play sort of situation. And yet at the same time, it's not that simple to just say, well, the teams with the most money win, as we'll see in this video, because the teams with the most money don't necessarily win all the games. There's many, many factors at play here. I think if you're to try and boil it down, which I don't think you can, I think it's very difficult to try and boil down something like this into a punchline. Here's the factors at play in defining what a program can be. You can't really do that. But if you were going to do that, you probably look at a couple things. You look at 1, money. Yes, money is still important. 2, development and coaching. There's going to be some teams in here. We're going to look at some talent composite. We're going to look at recruiting budgets for some of these teams. There's going to be teams that don't necessarily have the highest talent composite or have the highest recruiting budgets, but they're winning 8, 9, 10 games a year because they have great coaches, because they develop the players that they get. They turn 3-star prospects into draft picks, which is something that not everybody can say. You've got other programs that put a lot of money into recruiting, have a really nice talent composite, but they're not winning games because they're taking 4- and 5-star players and not developing them. So there's a lot at play here. We're going to dive into a bunch of different things. We're going to get things started with the top of the conference. Florida State just won the conference championship. Here's the different things we're going to look at when we're trying to figure out the ceiling for any given program. We're going to look at their recruiting budget, if I could find it. Some of these couldn't find the recruiting budget. I did, however, for a lot of these, find the average recruiting budget from 2017 to 2022. There was a USA Today article. I'll try and link that in the description if I can remember to do that. A USA Today article that had recruiting budgets for a lot of different programs over the last 5 years. The total recruiting spending over that period, Florida State had $7.5 million. In terms of finishing in the college football playoff polls, their best finish was at number 2, or their best rank in any given week was number 2. That was this past season. Their best finish was number 6. They've had 3 10-win seasons since 2015. They have had one conference championship since 2015. Their average team composite grade per 247 since 2020 is 18.2. So you've got to factor in a lot of different things here with Florida State. Obviously, Mike Norvell came in and rebuilt a program that had sort of fallen off there for a few years. So when you're looking at wins and losses since 2015, Norvell hasn't been there since 2015, so you've got a few things weighting that down. If you look at the past couple of years, their team composite grade is better. They're hovering around a top 10 team in team composite in recent years, and they're obviously coming off a season in which they were undefeated in the regular season and won the ACC. So there's a lot at play here. I think with Florida State, it kind of goes without saying, just because we just saw it with them, that their ceiling is a national championship. And I know they won one in 2014 when Jimbo Fisher was the coach. They've got national championship in their range of outcomes any given season. They're very disappointed at Florida State if you go out and win 7-8 games a year. They pour a lot of money into recruiting, and they have done a lot better in recent years in the transfer portal and in formalizing how they're going to go about treating NIL. They've been one of the leaders in college football in approaching NIL, and that's helped them sort of speed up this rebuild, as it were, as recruiting rankings and NIL aren't necessarily, on the same playing field, I guess. Like, teams that recruit high school really well don't necessarily always rate really highly in the transfer portal, and some teams heavily invest in the transfer portal but aren't super duper high in high school rankings. That's just sort of how it goes. Some programs decide to do things different ways. Florida State has done really well both in the transfer portal and in recruiting rankings. And so they're hovering probably around a top 10 to 15 roster in college football from here on out. So if you've got a top 10 to 15 roster, if a few things break right for you, you could break through and win a national championship. Let's go to Clemson. They are going to have the highest recruiting budget in a cumulative 2017 to 2022. They spent $9.9 million over that stretch. They actually spent $3.1 million in 2022, which was the second most in college football, only to Georgia. Now, you can decide how that recruiting budget has turned into wins and losses. They won 9 games this past season, which is a down year by their standards, but their best rank since 2015 is number 1. They've won a couple national championships. They finished at number 1. They've got 6 ACC conference championships since 2015, and they've got 8 10-win seasons. Their team composite average since 2020 is 4.5, which means they should be competing for national championships every single season. That's where some of the nuance comes in this exercise, is that obviously Clemson is not performing up to what their roster, their talent composite says that they are. The talent composite, though, heavily weights high school recruiting rankings coming out of high school. And Clemson does a really good job generally of recruiting high school players, and it's just a matter of, are they developing them? As of the past couple years, they haven't really done a good job of developing these high-rated high school recruits. They've done a better job on the defensive side of the ball than they have on the offensive side of the ball. They've had dominant defenses. They just haven't been able to score points, and that's led to a little bit of a dip, maybe even a blip on the radar, if you will, for Clemson. That being said, with their access to money, with their continued success recruiting high school players, their ceiling is still a national championship. It's still a 15-win season. If you can get a couple things to break right for you, if you're a Clemson fan, you can be right back where you were a few years ago with Trevor Lawrence, with Deshaun Watson, winning national championships. Next team in here, Notre Dame. Yes, I'm including Notre Dame in the ACC. I know they are not officially a member, but they're sort of affiliated with the ACC, and they play like 5 or 6 ACC teams every year. So they're in here as an ACC team. With Notre Dame, couldn't find the recruiting budget. It wasn't in that USA Today article, so we don't know how much they're spending. I'm sure somebody can find it somewhere. I just didn't dig deep enough to go find it. But their best national rank since 2015 is number 2. Their best finish on a season is number 3. They've got 7 10-win seasons. No conference championships, obviously. They're not really in a conference. Their best, or their team 247 composite since 2020 is 10.25. They're basically a top 10 roster every single year. For reference, it's worth noting that Michigan this past season steamrolled everybody, okay? Won a national championship, undefeated. They were 14th in the 2023 team composite ranking. So bear that in mind. Team composite ranking is not everything. It's just a metric in rating how good a team actually is. Notre Dame had a better team composite rating than Michigan did this past season. But obviously Michigan was a significantly better football team. So you've got to take it with a grain of salt a little bit. But they do have basically a top 10 roster every single year composite ranking, which means with their presumptive budget, I would imagine they're hitting up there with the big wigs in terms of recruiting spending. And the 247 team composite is heavily weighted, like I said, by high school recruiting rankings. The fact they've had 7 10-win seasons since 2015, they're right there. Again, the third team in the ACC that I think the ceiling for Notre Dame is a national championship. If everything breaks right for them, they could win it all. They could run the table. Next, we're going to go to NC State. Now, take this with a grain of salt, put an asterisk in it, because I am, in fact, an NC State fan. So bear that in mind while I'm talking about NC State, and just understand I do have a little bit of a bias. I'm going to admit it up front. Here's NC State. They spent from 2017 to 2022 in that USA Today article, $3.2 million on recruiting. Their best college football playoff rank since 2015 is 16th. Their best finish on a season is 18th. Actually, that was this past season. 0 10-win seasons, 0 conference championships since 2015. Their team composite average on 247 since 2020 is 35.7. With NC State, it's really interesting because if you look at State on paper, they should probably not be as good as they have been in recent years, at least compared to some of these other teams that they've performed better than in terms of wins and losses. You can compare them easily to North Carolina. We'll get into North Carolina here in a second. But there is a stark contrast in recruiting budget and team composite rankings, a.k.a. their ability to recruit high school players and what the recruiting websites tell you those players are. Carolina's done a better job of that than State has. But what NC State has done, and I think what a few programs have made their mark doing over the past half decade or so, is they take 3- and 4-star players and they develop them and turn them into NFL players. I think of programs like Kentucky, like Utah, as sort of an Iowa. You could throw Iowa in there as well, as sort of the blueprint for what NC State is. They are that type of program where they're never going to have the most money, and they're probably not always going to have the best players, but they develop players really, really well. And if things were to break right for them, if you were to hit on a quarterback recruit and get a stud there, acquire some talent through the transfer portal, which they have done this past season, they have a top 10 portal class, things could break right for them. So I have State at a program ceiling of 11 wins. A lot of that is due to the fact that I think they're going to win 10 games this upcoming season of 2024. And in a perfect world scenario, if you beat one of Tennessee or Clemson this year and don't lose games you shouldn't lose, you have an 11-win season right there. So all that being said, State will probably lose a game they should win. They do it every year, but, we're looking at things on paper. So for State, I think 11 wins is their ceiling. If we're being honest about it, 9, 10 wins every single year feels like that is what NC State is. 8, 9, 10 wins a year. North Carolina, from 2017 to 2022, they spent $5.1 million on recruiting. Their best college football playoff rank since 2015 is 10th. Their best finish is 10th. They have one 10-win season since 2015, no conference championships. Their 247 team composite average since 2020 is 18.25. So with North Carolina, I think based on paper, you should say this should be a team that is winning 10 games a year, or at least 9 to 10 games a season. They should probably perform better than they have in recent seasons. And that's mostly due to the fact that they have recruited high school recruits pretty well, as evidenced by that team composite ranking. And they have had NFL quarterbacks playing quarterback for them the past half decade in Drake May and Sam Howell. So you'd expect a little bit more out of North Carolina than what they've given you since 2015. You've only had that one 10-win season, no 10-win seasons since Mac Brown has been the coach, and that's been when they've had Sam Howell and Drake May. What is the ceiling for North Carolina? This is really difficult to contextualize because with them, what is the formula? On paper, you would say this should have a 12-win ceiling for North Carolina, but they haven't performed that way, even when they've done a good job in recruiting. The issue now is, are they going to be any better next year in 2024 than they were the past couple of years with Drake May, with Sam Howell? Probably not. So what's the ceiling? I've got the ceiling for North Carolina at 10 wins. I think in any given season, they can go win double-digit games, but can they reach that upper echelon of college programs? They have not shown the ability to do that in the modern era of college football, which I think is 2015 to now, as NIL has developed and as college football has changed in a massive way. So I think 10 wins for North Carolina. That may even be a little bit low because I know they won 11 games in 2015. But since 2015, they've sort of underperformed, and I'm trying to look at the big picture here for North Carolina. With Virginia, they've spent $3.8 million from 2017 to 2022 on recruiting. Their best national rank was 23rd. Their best finish in a season was 24th since 2015. No 10-win seasons, no conference championships. Their 247 team composite ranking since 2020 averages out to be above 50, meaning 247 ranks the top 50 teams every year in team composite ranking, and Virginia was not inside the top 50 in any given year. What's the ceiling for Virginia? That's very difficult to nail down as well because they've had some good players come through there. I think the issue and what folks are starting to realize about Virginia is that Tony Elliott might not be that great of a coach, and he's not getting the best out of what Virginia has to offer. I look back at the recruiting budgets, and again, I'm going to compare NC State and Virginia. Virginia has spent $3.8 million from 2017 to 2022 on recruiting. State spent $3.2 million, and NC State is winning 8 or 9 games every single season, and Virginia is winning. They had that one breakout year with Brendan Armstrong, but it's been 3 and 4 wins every single year since then. So they've struggled, and their team hasn't been as good. They're not getting a bang for their buck in high school recruiting. They also haven't been super successful in the transfer portal either. That being said, they have had a few good players come out of there. They've got Malik Washington, the wide receiver that'll get drafted this coming season. He was incredibly productive. You've had a few corners come out of there in recent years that have been really good. Overall, though, I think the program ceiling right now for Virginia and probably for the next foreseeable future is 9 wins. If everything were to break right for Virginia right now, I see them having a 9-3, 9-4 season. Let's go to Virginia Tech. 2017 and 2022, they spent $3.7 million on high school recruiting. Their best national rank since 2015 is 13th. Their best finish is 22nd. They've got one 10-win season since 2015. No conference championships. And curiously enough, I was surprised to find this. They were not inside the top 50 in 247 Sports team composite ranking since 2020. Not in any given season were they in the top 50 in talent composite, which is really interesting because I would have thought Virginia Tech would be recruiting high school players better than that, but they have struggled to recruit high school players, and that has sort of changed the outlook, I guess, for Virginia Tech. That being said, I don't think that this window of time from 2015 to 2023 is the truth about what Virginia Tech is as a program. And I do think Brent Pry has things moving in the right direction for Virginia Tech. They also have probably the second or third best home field advantage in the conference at Lane Stadium. That place is terrifying for opposing teams to come play. So they do have that, and the history of Frank Beamer being the coach there for a million years, winning a ton of football games. So I don't think that Virginia Tech is truly what they've been the past 8 to 10 years. I think that their ceiling is better than that. So I have their program ceiling at 11 wins. I think for them, best case scenario, you're winning double-digit games every season like they were with Frank Beamer. I think they can get there again with Brent Pry. And I think it's very possible that over the next couple of years, Virginia Tech makes a little bit of a surge and starts to get things rolling a little bit like they did in years past. Let's look at Georgia Tech. Couldn't find their recruiting budget. Wasn't in that USA Today article. So if you can find it, go find it, but couldn't grab it here. They have not been ranked since 2015. They have no 10-win seasons, no conference championships. But interestingly enough, in their 247 sports team composite ranking, their average rank since 2020 is 33.25. If I were Georgia Tech, I would have expected some more success with these high school players that they've been getting. Granted, I think what's been happening is, like in the case of Jahmyr Gibbs, you get really good high school players that play well for you one year and then transfer to another place and play well for that other place. So I think with Georgia Tech, you can probably expect more than what they've given you the past couple of years. They won, I think, 7 games this past season, and that was their best season since Paul Johnson was the coach at Georgia Tech. I think the ceiling, if everything were to break right for Georgia Tech right now, is 9 wins. It's very possible over the next half decade that they get things rolling a little bit and start to build the program up. As of right now, they have struggled for so long, and they're in the shadow of Georgia. They're in the same state, and Georgia is crushing everybody. And so Georgia Tech has not been able to succeed very much. And they've struggled a little bit in the ACC as well in terms of wins and losses. Why don't we talk about Miami? I can hear people perking up a little bit as they hear, oh, what do you think Miami can be? Miami's very interesting, obviously. They're a kind of a bulletin board talking point for college football. Let's look at their history here. Since 2015, their best college football playoff ranking is number 2. Their best finish in a season was number 10 in the country. They have one 10-win season since 2015. No conference championships. Here is what's interesting, though, with Miami. Their 247 sports team composite average ranking since 2020 is 13.75. This is a team that should be winning 10 games every single season. They should be considered along the likes of Notre Dame, Florida State, Clemson in terms of team success. And yet, over the past 4 seasons, they have not succeeded like what the team composite rankings would have you believe. It's very interesting to have to kind of put a cap on what Miami could end up being. I think Mario Cristobal has proven himself to be a great recruiter his past couple seasons with Miami. My question with Mario Cristobal is, even if you go back to his time at Oregon, he recruited incredibly well at Oregon, didn't always get the best out of his recruiting classes at Oregon. I think if you were to say the best would be national championship contention, it would honestly be what Dan Lanning is doing right now with Oregon. It remains to be seen if Mario Cristobal is going to get Miami to make that jump into national contention. The recruiting rankings would have you believe that, yes, Miami will get there because they've got talent up and down the roster. They're recruiting 5-star, 4-star players. It's just a matter of what they can turn those players into. I think the ceiling for Miami is 12 wins. I think a lot of people have thought that for many years, and Miami just has not lived up to expectations. And they're probably, if you were to make a list of the most underwhelming college football programs of the 2000s, Miami probably tops the list. We expect a lot of Miami because of their history, because of how good they were at the turn of the century. And then they have money, and they've evidenced that by their ability to recruit high school players. They just haven't turned those high school recruiting rankings into wins. It's very possible over the next couple of years they do that. But as of right now, they haven't yet done it. So we're going to say 12 wins. I feel like that's pretty comfortable for them. I do not think right now the ceiling for them is a national championship. Could be wrong. They could make that leap. And if you get a quarterback in there that makes life different for everybody else, i.e. potentially a Cam Ward, maybe they make that leap. But as of right now, I'm not quite sure that they have what it takes to get there. Let's talk the newcomers, SMU. SMU is going to be a little bit skewed because they've been in the American Athletic Conference the past few years. So take these with a grain of salt. But their best national rank was actually this past season since 2015. It was 24th. Their best finish was this past season at 24th. They've got 2 10-win seasons, and they just won the American Athletic Conference this past year. Their team composite average since 2020, it was 34th in 2023, pretty good. It was outside the top 50 in 2020, 21, and 2022. So what do you do with SMU? SMU is a program that I think now that they're in the ACC could make a leap forward, especially with the momentum coming off of the 11-win season they had in 2023. They could definitely jump forward and be a contender for the ACC. I would not put that past them to do that. That being said, I have their ceiling right now in the ACC with the uptick in competition at 10 wins. I think about what Louisville did when they jumped from the American Athletic Conference into the ACC. Granted, a very different landscape in college football when they made that jump. But they came in from the American Athletic where they won double-digit games, and immediately I think they won 8 games in the ACC. Could SMU be a perennial 7, 8, 9-win program coming in? Sure, certainly. I think Rhett Lashley has SMU in a really good place. And believe it or not, they do have a lot of program tradition. They have won national championships down there in Dallas. They've got Heisman Trophy winners in Dallas. So SMU could certainly make a leap and enter into the ACC's contenders. If you were to have a category for contenders, SMU could become one of those teams. As of right now, though, I'm going with 10 wins. I think it sort of remains to be seen how they perform against the uptick in competition. In fact, I think I look at their bowl game this past season. They played Boston College and lost. Boston College is not exactly the upper echelon of the ACC. Granted, it's a bowl game. You got players opting out. The rosters look very, very different, but that is, I think, worth considering. Let's look at Cal. From 17 to 2022, they spent $3.7 million on recruiting. They have not been ranked since 2015. No 10-win seasons, no conference championships. Their team composite ranking average since 2020 is 44.5. I think with Cal, they have underperformed compared to what you would expect from them the past decade plus. You've got the spike years, I guess, with Jared Goff, with Aaron Rodgers, but if you don't have a NFL superstar quarterback, they've struggled. They've not been very good the past few years. I think if everything were to break right for Cal right now, I would have them at 8 wins. I think an 8-4 and 8-5 season right now for what Cal is probably as good as it's going to get. I think you look too at their schedule this upcoming season. They're going to travel more than any team in college football because they're going to obviously go from the West Coast to the East Coast, which is stupid, but it is what it is. It's, I guess, the price you got to pay for being in a Power 5 conference now. They're going to get killed in travel, and I think it's going to translate into what happens on the field. I think that of the 3 teams coming in, Cal is the worst. It's very possible this coming season, Cal is a 3 or 4 win team. I don't know how much they improve. I guess once the ACC money starts hitting the bank account, things could change a little bit. But as of right now, I don't have a rosy view of what Cal can be in the ACC in the next half decade or so. Let's look at Stanford. We have no recruiting budget here for Stanford, but in terms of rankings since 2015, they're pretty good looking. They have a peak rank of 6th. Their best finish was 6th. They have 2 10-win seasons since 2015. They have a conference championship since 2015. Their 247 team composite is 26.25. Stanford is really interesting because they have managed to recruit high school players really well. They're on par with North Carolina for high school recruiting, and they have won a lot of games in recent years. Granted, not with this current coaching staff. In fact, they've went 3-9 this past season with the current coaching staff. But you have to believe that what Jim Harbaugh and what David Shaw did at Stanford still sort of lingers, and I think the way that high school players think of Stanford is you think of them as winning a lot of games from 2010 to 2020. I still think Stanford can get back there. I know college football has changed quite a bit, and I'm not sure how invested Stanford is going to be in NIL, in the transfer portal. But they've shown that they can compete even in recent seasons and win a lot of football games. So I've got the ceiling for Stanford right now, as things stand, at 11 wins. Can they find what David Shaw and Jim Harbaugh found at Stanford? Can they have that similar success? I don't know. But 11 wins is on par with what David Shaw and Jim Harbaugh were doing. Harbaugh won 12 games. Shaw won 11 games one season. I think 11 is the ceiling for what Stanford can be. Let's look at Louisville. Obviously, just went to the ACC championship game and lost in a close game to Florida State. They won 10 games this past season. Their best national rank since 2015 is 5th. Their best finish to a season is 13th, which is what they were this past year. They've got one 10-win season, which was in 2023, so it's fresh on our minds. No conference championships since 2015. In team composite rating, this is really interesting because they were outside the top 50 in 2020, 21, 20, and 2022. In 2023, though, Jeff Brom gets hired from Purdue, comes in, and obviously we all know the story, wins 10 games with them. But more than that, he has them at 28th in team composite ranking in 2023. I think the Louisville that was pre-Jeff Brom and the Louisville that is Jeff Brom are very different. They're very interesting because can they develop a program that is a perennial power in the ACC, that is contending for ACC championships year in and year out? Yes, I think that is within the realm of possibilities for Louisville. You do have to count on a few things. You have to count on Clemson staying down. You have to count on other programs like NC State, for example, not making that step forward and developing as a program themselves. But as things stand right now, Louisville is right there in that upper echelon of the ACC, and I don't really have any reason to believe they can't stay there. They've done a really good job adding talent through the transfer portal. They've got Tyler Shuck at quarterback. They had a transfer quarterback this past season. They're probably going to add another one in 2025. Brom has done a really good job. I have their ceiling at 11 wins. You could probably argue me into 12. I think where Louisville's ceiling is right now is maintaining the success they had this past year. If you can win double-digit games year in and year out, or at least be contending for that, 9, 10, 11 wins a season, that's what Louisville's ceiling is. They've shown that they don't necessarily need to recruit in high school a ton, but that they can be successful bringing in transfers. And they're very different than a lot of these other teams here that heavily rely on high school recruiting to be the backbone of their team. And I think theoretically, that should be what most teams' backbone is in high school recruiting. And I think most teams approach it that way. But for Louisville, I think what Jeff Brom is trying to do is raise the floor of what Louisville is in his first 2 seasons and then start to lean into high school recruiting. Because I think that's where you get longevity as a program, is you lean into high school recruiting. And I think you use portal to supplement those holes that you don't get to fill with high school players. So Louisville's very, very interesting because they're doing it differently than everybody else, and they've had recent success that you would point to say they can continue this thing. And it remains to be seen if they do. But I do think a perennial 10-win season is the ceiling for what Louisville can be. Let's go to Pitt. Let's look at their rankings here. Their best college football playoff ranking is 12th. Their best finish to a season is 12th. They've got that one 10-win season where they went to the ACC championship with Kenny Pickett and Jordan Addison. No wins, though, And their team composite average since 2020 is 39.5. I think Pitt showed us what their ceiling is when they brought in Kenny Pickett, when they developed Jordan Addison. That was best case scenario. The stars aligned. This is the best possible thing that could happen for Pitt. That is going to an ACC championship, winning 11 games or 10 games or whatever it was. That's what you hope you can be if you're at Pitt. And I think that's their ceiling. So I've got their ceiling right now at 11 wins in any given season. Let's go to Syracuse. Syracuse is really interesting. They kept Dino Babers for a really long time, and they had one good season. And like I said at the beginning, that 10-win season, that was sort of a blip on the radar. They've been a 6 or 7 win team all other seasons under Dino Babers, all other seasons in the past 7-8 years. So their best national rank came in that one season when they won 10 games. It's 12th. Their best finish to a season is 20th. Again, that same year, and that one 10-win season. So that one season is accounting for their best rank, their best finish, and their one 10-win season. They have no conference championships. Here's where Syracuse is really interesting. Their team composite average since 2020 is not ranked inside the top 50 in any one of those seasons. So they're not necessarily a team that on paper looks super great. And I know Fran Brown gets hired in this coaching cycle, brings in Kyle McCord, brings in some other transfers as well. Folks are excited at Syracuse for what they can be this coming season. And I don't want to limit what Syracuse can be by what they've been under a different coaching staff. So I'm trying not to do that. I do think, however, their ceiling is about 10 wins. I think if everything were to break right for Syracuse, you're looking at a double-digit win season like we saw a few years ago. I don't think that is what we should expect for Syracuse, though. But if everything were to go correctly, could you win 9-10 games every single year? Sure. That would probably need to be developed over a 5 to 7 year period, though. And I don't know that we should expect 10 wins in any given season for the next half decade. Potentially, if Kyle McCord pans out, you could break through. Remains to be seen. Boston College. They were ranked at one point since 2015 at 16th. They have not finished inside the top 25 college football playoffs since 2015. No 10-win seasons, no conference championships. In 2 of the 4 seasons from 2020 to 2023, they were inside the top 50 in talent composite. The other 2 seasons, they were not. So they're sort of a fringe top 50 roster on any given season. So I put their team composite average at 50.5, which basically means they're sort of a top 50 roster in any given season. The thing with Boston College, you had Jeff Hafley, but he was just hired as the defensive coordinator by the Green Bay Packers. So you've got to hire a new coach late in the cycle, and it remains to be seen what that looks like. I think all of your top candidates are gone. So you might promote from within if you're Boston College, or you might go get a guy that you have had your eye on. I don't imagine you're going to get your preferred choice since it's this late in the cycle, since the transfer portal is done. It also remains to be seen how this roster sort of depletes itself as there's now a 30-day window where Boston College players can transfer elsewhere because their coach left. Who knows what that looks like? So Boston College right now is going to be very, very difficult to pin down because this offseason could define their next 5 years. Who do they hire at coach? What does the roster look like when the coach does arrive? Are they the sort of team that could eke out a 6-7 win season next year? Or are they the sort of team that's so talent depleted and they haven't been able to recoup in this year's and potentially next year's recruiting cycles that they're a 3-4 win team? Who knows? I've got their ceiling right now at 8 wins. I think if everything were to break right for Boston College, maybe not next season, because I don't think 8 wins is within the possibilities for them next year. But maybe in a couple years, you could be an 8-win team perennially. They won 7 games this past season, and I think they were trending towards a potential, 8, maybe 9-win team if things broke right for them. Obviously, the Hafley thing, that sets you back a little bit. But I've got them at 8 wins. Again, hard to quantify what actually is the ceiling for a program like Boston College. But I think if you win 8 games there, fans are happy. Let's look at Duke. Believe it or not, even with Mike Elko and all the noise and all the stuff that they did in 2022 and 2023, they were never ranked. They have not finished inside the top 25 since 2015. No 10-win seasons, no conference championships, and they were not inside the top 50 in team composite since 2020. What do you do with Duke? With Manny Diaz being the new coach, getting Malik Murphy as your transfer quarterback, who's going to have several years of eligibility remaining, what could Duke possibly put together under Manny Diaz? Again, hard to quantify because Duke, compared to some of these other teams in the ACC, is known to be a bit depleted in resources. They're kind of working on a different playing field than teams like Florida State, Clemson, Louisville even, NC State even. They have performed better than the sum of their parts in recent years, but also they had a really good quarterback in Riley Leonard. Now he's at Notre Dame. I think the ceiling for Duke is 10 wins. Manny Diaz could get the most out of what's there on the roster. I don't think there's a ton of talent on the roster right now. They're probably a 5 or 6 win team next year. And maybe that's built up to the point where maybe Malik Murphy, let's say he is the truth. And 2 years from now, they go, they win 5 games next year, 7 games the year after that. And then in the final year of Malik Murphy's tenure, you break through and you have a 10-win season. I think that's very possible. I do not think Duke's ceiling is perennially a 10-win team because if Manny Diaz succeeds at Duke, he's going to go get a head coaching job at a bigger school. It's what we just saw with Mike Elko. Duke, the David Cutcliffe tenure there is an anomaly. You're not going to have a coach win 9 games at Duke and stay. It just won't happen. So, the program ceiling for them is on any given season, if you build up the roster and you have a good coach and things break right for you, you could jump out and have a 10-win season. But is the ceiling for Duke perennially a 10-win season? No. I think it's a breakthrough season, maybe every 3, 4, 5, 6 years, and then you jump back down to a 6, 7-win team when the roster gets depleted, when the transfer portal comes calling and steals all your best players. Duke is very interesting, but I do not think that even though they could have maybe a better season than some of these other programs, like maybe a Syracuse, maybe a Pitt, Louisville, I don't think you can expect that continued sort of success at Duke. There's one final team to mention, that is Wake Forest. So Dave Clawson at Wake Forest, I think, has taken probably the most limited program in the ACC and turned it into a program that in any given season can win 8, 9, 10, 11 even games if things all break right for them. Where Wake Forest is really interesting is they are like Duke in that I don't think they can sustain any type of success. They've not been ranked inside the top 50 in 247 Sports Team Composite since 2020 in the last 4 years. And they won 11 games in 2021. They did not have a top 50 team in terms of team composite, which is heavily weighted by high school rankings. Bear that in mind. But they're a team that takes 2- and 3-star players, develops them over 4 seasons, and then tries to break through when you develop that core of players that you recruited as 3 stars. And you just hope they don't transfer out. I think where Wake Forest is in a really tough situation is that they recognize, and Dave Clawson recognizes, that they win when they can develop and keep players and sort of compound that interest over 4 seasons and turn them into a winner. I don't think Wake Forest is going to be able to do that in the new portal era where guys are leaving. You've seen Wesley Graves leave, their stud wide receiver. You've seen Sam Hartman leave in recent years. They either have guys that leave during the draft or leave for the draft or leave for the portal. You're not going to see guys stay 4 years, develop, and then win a bunch of games in that ultimate season. So Wake Forest is really interesting. I think if you were to put a cap on what they can be in modern college football, you might say 11 wins because that's what they did in 2021. I don't think that even as much as college football has changed over the past 2 years, I don't think 11 wins is Wake Forest's ceiling anymore. I think they're a 9-win ceiling. I think if everything were to break right for them right now, in any given season, you could get to 10 wins. I don't think that they're going to have the requisite talent in order to do that. I think that their roster is going to get poached year over year, and they don't have the sort of deep pockets that can compete with some of these other teams that are coming in and taking their guys that show promise. So with Wake, I think it is a little bit difficult to quantify what they could be because they do sort of they do the slow build sort of thing. And maybe it's possible Dave Clawson gets them back to where they were with Sam Hartman, with Jamie Newman. But I think we saw the formula when Jamie Newman was the quarterback at Wake Forest. He transferred to Georgia. When Sam Hartman, in his final season this past year, transferred to Notre Dame. I think Wake Forest's best players are going to develop because it is a really good developmental program, and they have a great coaching staff. But they're going to go there for a year or two, develop, get better, and then transfer somewhere else and win somewhere else, and then go to the NFL. So I think that's the sad reality of what Wake Forest is, and you could probably also parlay that to what Duke is. And I think it's also very possible that Dave Clawson, if they have another breakthrough season like they did in 2021, he goes to a different program where he's got more resources, where he can compete on a more level playing field. That was my breakdown of what the ceilings are for every team in the ACC, all 16, 17, 18, all 38 of them. I hope you enjoyed this video. Leave a like, leave a comment if you enjoyed it. Also, hit the notification bell and subscribe if you enjoyed this video and if you enjoy what I'm doing here on the channel. I greatly appreciate everybody watching, everybody commenting, and all those things. We'll try and do these with the other conferences, the SEC, the Big 10, the Big 12, rip to the Pac-12. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.